It's time now for Perspective, and it is Monday, which means it's time to check in on how things are looking for the leading candidates ahead of the first round of the French presidential election on the 10th of April, which is now just 6 days away. I'm joined by French history expert Andrew Smith from Chichester University, our regular guest throughout this election period. It's good to have you with us once again, Andrew. Now,
Thank you.
this weekend saw a huge rally by President Emmanuel Macron at the huge Défense, sorry, I should have said La Défense arena, rather. The mood was festive, Macron was strident. Did it go the way he wanted it to go, do you think?
Well, as you say, it was a bombastic meeting. It looked like WrestleMania when it started, with the multiplex screens, the hexagon that he walked up to, and the fireworks sounding all round. Of course, it was a huge packed room. You know, it holds something like 35,000 people. And Emmanuel Macron had a series of priorities there. One of the first things was to kind of personalise his image, to sort of make himself seem more human and less Jupiterian, perhaps, than we've seen in the past. And so he talked about his own record, but also his experience and his frustrations. But I think he also wanted to, first of all, to demonstrate that he still has something to offer to the centre and left, to the kind of social democratic voters who might be tempted to be swayed round to him. So he really wanted to outline all of those kind of proposals he had around things like, you know, the raising of the Macron premium and all these kind of ideas of social solidarity. He set out his key priorities, ideas of gender inequality, protecting children, education and health as being his priorities. But he also wanted, I think, to first of all to reassure the centre right, to say, look, I'm still someone that understands budgets. I'm still someone that understands how to, make sure that the state has to work in order to be social and to pay more. But his big thing, his big enemy, as it were, is abstention. And what this was designed to do was to re-inject dynamism, to excite people, to also to show them that there is a possibility that the election could still potentially favour the far right if people aren't convinced that they ought to rally to the president in charge.
And that warning against complacency was, I think it's fair to say, very much directed at Marine Le Pen, even if he didn't mention her by name. Just how scared should Macron be of his old rival?
I mean, I think it's an important question because, you know, this is really the thing that has dogged Macron throughout. He has been dominant in the polls, and that's been great while he's been remote from the campaign and all the rest of it. But by the same token, that has meant there's a degree of complacency, perhaps, and that's his really big fear, that people will somehow think, oh, well, it's absolutely fine. There won't be this rally for the Republic if it's the second round between Macron and Le Pen. Now, for Le Pen, I think, you know, you could call her perhaps submarine Le Pen. She seems to be sort of cruising below the surface, trying to sort of project an image of calm. She keeps talking about chaos and all the rest of it. And this very much seems to be the idea that she has somehow used Eric Zemmour as a lightning rod to draw up the worst of the kind of condemnation of all of his difficulties. And of course, Macron condemned anti-Semitic authors on TV screens. He also condemned all the kind of the nativism that we were seeing around these ideas. Now, this is very much the worry, that people think, oh, well, things are fine, Macron doesn't excite me. But then by the same token, Marine Le Pen manages to rally her base to vote for that nativist programme. And of course, there are all sorts of dangers there. We've seen these discussions about, you know, the immediate referendums about revising the constitution, the idea that there's going to be a sort of soft peddling on Europe, looking more to the example of people like Russia and people like Hungary, of course. And she was very quick to congratulate Viktor Orban last night as well. So I think there is some sort of sense that this is a real danger for France, that the right remains a danger. As Emmanuel Macron put it, there are people who are the sort of inheritors of those General de Gaulle fought against. And that very much is being squared very, very firmly at the party of Marine Le Pen.
I'd just like to go back to Le Pen's campaign for a second. A lot of people, a lot of papers, commentators, describing it as her most boring campaign yet, possibly also her most effective. Do you think her campaign has been boring compared to what we've seen her do in the past?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? As you say, this is, of course, her, you know, really third prominent campaign in which she's really kind of battling against it. Mélenchon as well, he's on to his third round, and Macron, of course, into his second. So I think for many voters, they feel like they know the programmes of these candidates. And Marine Le Pen has had by all tokens, something of a boring campaign. Now, she's had to keep her head down. Why? Of course, we heard at the start that the war in Ukraine was having a kind of rally to the flag effect and pushing people towards supporting Macron as a leader who was, demonstrating leadership in a crisis. Marine Le Pen wants to keep her head down while people are talking about Ukraine because of that long history of praising Putin, because of that long history of, taking finance from Russian banks and all the rest of it. She maintains a low profile in those issues, and she has been targeting solely this concept of purchasing power. That's very much been this idea. And we see that with Mélenchon as well, a desire to make this a referendum on France's social policy, to look at those who are sort of, aggrieved by this huge boom in the cost of living and try to offer them solutions. But that's very much the danger. And we can see the electorate don't really trust somebody like Marine Le Pen in a crisis or to lead France on the international stage. Around, I think an Ipsos poll had only about a third of French people said they thought she was capable of those things. Whereas it's about the opposite for Macron. Over 2/3 of people see him as being a leader in that frame. So it's very much a deliberate tactic, I think. As I said, you could call her Submarine Le Pen and see her trying to have this boring campaign to anesthetize the Republic so that people somehow feel that this might be a sort of permissive march to the second round. And then if people don't turn out, oh well, then suddenly it can happen. Macron mentioned in the campaign speech in the meeting that, the impossible can happen. We saw it with Brexit and all the rest of it. And it shouldn't be assumed that those arguments have already been made. The far right represents a danger.
We are now in the final push. Election day is on Sunday, the 10th of April. What do you think we should be looking out for in the coming days?
I think what we'll see is, of course, we've got a series of rallies from some of the main candidates. They will be desperately trying to fight against that idea of abstention. We saw Jean-Luc Mélenchon speaking in Toulouse. He said 1 in 3 voters, this is his figure, don't know the date of the first round of the election. And he wants to get out there and mobilise that popular vote. I think Emmanuel Macron will pump up the danger of the far right, try to mobilise people to think this isn't a done deal. This isn't already won. So I think a lot of people will be talking up the uncertainty of this election. The story of it so far has been the consistency in the polls, the idea that actually it looks a lot like 2017 in many of the same ways. But I think right up until that last moment, we'll see the leading candidates banging that drum to say people need to get out, they need to vote, and they need to encourage others to get out and vote and ensure that France has its democratic moment.
And you will, of course, be following the next few days very closely indeed here on France 24. Andrew Smith, thank you very much for that insight.